Welcome back to our channel, where real fear meets real hope, and survival is never guaranteed. The aircraft lifted into the darkened sky, carrying people who believed this was just another ordinary flight. Business travelers leaned back with tired eyes, families adjusted blankets, and crew members followed routines repeated so often they felt automatic. Outside the windows, the clouds looked harmless, soft, and endless. Inside, nothing suggested that this journey would soon become a silent lesson in mortality. At cruising altitude, comfort creates an illusion that the ground can never reach you. The first sign arrived, as a vibration so gentle that most passengers mistook it for turbulence. The wings shuddered briefly, then steadied, and the cabin returned to its calm rhythm. Yet instruments in the cockpit told a different story. Numbers flickered where stability should have been, and warning indicators glowed with unfamiliar urgency. A problem had begun quietly, like a fracture forming deep inside solid glass. Minutes passed. The vibration returned, stronger this time, followed by a low mechanical growl traveling through the floor. Overhead bins rattled softly, and heads turned toward the windows. The sky outside had changed, clouds now towering and bruised with shadow. The aircraft pushed forward anyway, committed to a path that suddenly felt uncertain. Without warning, the left engine temperature climbed beyond safe limits. Sensors detected imbalance, and automated systems adjusted fuel flow, struggling to control a failure that refused to settle. Almost immediately, the right engine showed irregular pressure readings. What should have been redundancy became a reflection of the same growing threat. The plane was no longer protected by margins or backups. It was balanced on timing alone. Inside the cabin, the lights flickered once. That single flicker awakened fear. Phones were gripped tighter. Prayers formed silently. Somewhere between disbelief and dread, people sensed that something irreversible had begun. Flight attendants moved with controlled urgency, scanning faces, checking seats, maintaining calm through disciplined motion rather than sound. Then came the noise that changed everything. A sharp metallic bang tore through the fuselage, followed by a sudden drop that stole breath from every chest. Oxygen masks fell in perfect unison, transforming the ceiling into a forest of yellow. The illusion of safety shattered completely. This was no longer a delay or a minor issue. This was survival. Altitude vanished quickly as one engine failed outright. The second struggled, producing uneven surges that felt like a heart skipping under stress. Alarms layered the cockpit with relentless demands. Outside, the storm swallowed the plane, rain hammering against metal, lightning illuminating the wings in violent flashes. Passengers braced instinctively, gripping armrests, holding strangers' hands, clinging to thoughts of unfinished lives. Some counted each breath as if it might be their last. Others closed their eyes, preparing for an ending they believed was now inevitable. Time stretched into something heavy and unfamiliar. The descent slowed, then steadied, but control remained fragile. The remaining engine did not fail completely, yet refused to deliver enough thrust to climb or escape the storm. The aircraft leveled at a dangerously low altitude, balanced between controlled flight and freefall. Every calculation now mattered. Every second carried weight. Far below, scattered town lights pierced the darkness, distant and unreachable. Mountains loomed ahead, hidden but known. The flight path narrowed into a fragile corridor of possibility, with almost no room for error. This was where training met instinct, and where hope was forced to compete with physics. Inside the cabin, fear reached its quietest form. There were no screams, only shallow breathing and the soft rustle of movement. People prepared in private ways, memorizing faces, pressing foreheads together, making silent promises. The idea of death did not need words. It lived in every thought. The aircraft shook again as turbulence slammed into weakened systems. For a terrifying moment, the remaining engine faltered, its sound dropping to a hollow whine. The plane dipped sharply, the horizon disappearing. Gravity tightened its grip. Then something changed. Not a miracle yet, not rescue, but a shift so small it could have been missed. The engine stabilized just enough to hold altitude. The wings responded slightly better. Ahead, the storm thinned, revealing a narrow opening in the clouds. The passengers did not know it yet, but the impossible had begun to move closer. The aircraft continued forward through the night, a massive shape suspended between darkness below and thinner air above. Inside, the mood had shifted from confusion into something colder and heavier. The realization that this was no longer a routine emergency had spread, without words. The plane was wounded, and everyone inside could feel it. Subtle vibrations moved through the fuselage, irregular and unfamiliar, like a heartbeat that could not find a rhythm. Over the wing, faint reflections of moonlight revealed damage that no checklist could fully describe. Something vital had been lost, and time was no longer an ally. Fuel calculations were being reworked again and again. Numbers adjusted as new data arrived from failing sensors. One engine was producing uneven thrust, the other running hotter than expected. Electrical systems flickered between primary and backup, each switch creating a small window of hope before uncertainty returned. The aircraft was still flying, but not confidently. It was being carried forward by momentum, by physics, and by decisions made under crushing pressure. Every minute bought another mile, and every mile created new risks. In the cabin, the air felt different. People sensed it even if they did not understand it. Movements slowed. Conversations faded into silence. Some passengers stared at the seat in front of them, memorizing scratches in the plastic, as if details could anchor them to the moment. Others closed their eyes not to sleep, but to escape the sight of the trembling wings. Overhead, bins rattled softly, a reminder that gravity was waiting patiently below. The plane encountered turbulence, not violent but persistent. Each small drop tightened nerves. The damaged system struggled to compensate, working harder. Heating faster, wearing down. Altitude was adjusted slightly, chosen not for comfort but for survival. Lower air promised better engine response but less margin for error. Higher air offered efficiency but punished instability. The chosen path was a narrow compromise, and it demanded absolute precision. Minutes stretched unnaturally long. The aircraft passed over dark land and darker water, areas with few options if the situation worsened. Emergency planning unfolded in layers. Every possible outcome was considered, including the ones no one wanted to acknowledge. Checklists were followed, then followed again, not because repetition changed the outcome, but because discipline created order in chaos. The aircraft responded, but reluctantly, like a machine arguing against its own limits. In the cabin, flight attendants moved carefully, their training guiding each step. Their faces remained composed, but their eyes revealed the strain of responsibility. They secured what could be secured, checked what could be checked, and offered reassurance through presence rather than promises. Passengers watched them closely, reading meaning into every gesture. A calm walk suggested hope. A hurried movement suggested fear. The sky outside remained deceptively peaceful. Stars were sharp and indifferent, scattered across a vast black canvas. The aircraft cut through this silence with a sound that was no longer smooth. The damaged engine produced a rougher tone, uneven and strained, like metal grinding against invisible resistance. Instruments confirmed what ears already knew. The margin was shrinking. Far ahead, an alternate runway was identified, distant but reachable if conditions held. Weather there was marginal, not dangerous, but far from ideal. Crosswinds shifted unpredictably, and visibility was decreasing. Still, it was a place to aim for, a thin line of possibility stretching across the darkness. Calculations were made again, this time with greater urgency. Fuel reserves were tight, but not gone. Control authority was reduced, but not lost. Everything existed in fragile balance. As the aircraft descended slightly, pressure changes moved through the cabin. Ears popped. Stomachs tightened. The physical sensations made the situation real in a way announcements never could. Some passengers reached for hands beside them, strangers connected by circumstance. Others whispered prayers, not out of fear alone, but out of instinct. As old as flight itself, then another warning appeared, subtle but alarming. A secondary system, stressed by compensation, began to show irregular behavior. It was not a failure yet, but it was a threat. The kind that did not demand immediate action, but punished delay. Decisions had to be made without certainty, guided by experience and instinct rather than guarantees. The aircraft was being asked to do something it was never meant to do, and still it obeyed for now. Below, lights from small towns drifted past. Fragile human constellations on the ground. Each one represented safety, distance, and the cruel fact that they were still far away. The runway ahead remained out of sight, hidden beyond clouds and curvature, but it existed. Belief in that fact became essential. Not optimism, but commitment. The descent plan was adjusted. Speed was carefully managed. Neither too fast to stress the structure nor too slow to invite stall. Every change produced a reaction, sometimes delayed, sometimes sharper than expected. The aircraft felt alive, not in a comforting way, but in a way that demanded respect. It would not forgive mistakes. As the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. The damaged system stabilized, not fully, but enough. Temperatures stopped climbing. Vibrations eased slightly. It was not recovery, but it was resistance. The aircraft, battered and imperfect, was still fighting the fall. And in that narrow space between failure and survival, the possibility of the impossible quietly began to form. The aircraft was no longer simply falling through the sky. It was wandering. Without stable thrust and with damaged systems struggling to communicate, the massive machine drifted through layers of air that changed temperature and pressure without warning. Each shift altered its behavior. Sometimes the nose dipped gently, almost kindly. Other times it lurched, reminding everyone that gravity had not forgotten them. The cabin lights flickered again, weaker now, as if conserving the last fragments of power left inside the aircraft's wounded body. Passengers had stopped checking their phones. Many had turned them off to save battery, knowing there would be no signal where they were going. Some held the devices anyway, screens dark, fingers wrapped around them like talismans. Others clutched armrests until their knuckles lost color. Breathing became shallow across the cabin, not from panic alone, but from the strange awareness that every breath felt borrowed. Time behaved differently here. Seconds stretched, while minutes collapsed into brief blinks of memory. In the cockpit, instruments told conflicting stories. One gauge showed altitude dropping too fast. Another hesitated as if unsure. Warning lights glowed like tired eyes refusing to close. The pilots worked without speaking. Not because there was nothing to say, but because words would not improve physics. Their movements were precise, practiced, almost ceremonial. Hands adjusted trim, checked remaining hydraulics, tested responses that barely existed anymore. Each action was a question asked of a damaged aircraft. And each weak response was an answer filled with uncertainty. Outside, clouds thickened, turning the world into a pale, endless ocean. Visibility dropped, erasing any sense of direction. There was no horizon, no reference point. Only white motion rushing past the windows. The plane trembled as ice crystals brushed along the fuselage, adding weight it could not afford. Somewhere deep within the structure, metal complained softly. A low groan carried through the frame, felt more than heard. The aircraft was tired. It had carried too many lives too far, with too little left to give. In the cabin, the preparation had already happened. Seatbelts were tight. Shoes were on. Bags were secured. Instructions had been followed not because anyone believed they would matter, but because doing something felt better than doing nothing. Parents pressed foreheads against their children's hair, memorizing warmth. Strangers held hands without looking at each other. Comfort borrowed without explanation. Fear settled into a quiet form, heavy and still, no longer screaming but waiting. Then something changed. It was not dramatic at first. No sudden lift, no roar of returning power. It was a subtle resistance, almost imperceptible, as if the air itself had thickened beneath the wings. The rate of descent slowed by a fraction. Instruments hesitated, then adjusted. The nose stopped dipping further and instead held, trembling in place. The aircraft did not climb, but it stopped falling the way it had been before. The difference was small, but in the sky, small differences decide everything. The pilots noticed immediately. Control inputs that had felt useless moments earlier now produced faint responses. Not strong, not reliable, but real. The aircraft was gliding, not simply dropping. A narrow corridor of survivability opened, fragile as glass. The plane was no longer asking permission to exist. It was negotiating. Outside the clouds, wind patterns shifted. Rising air currents formed along invisible boundaries where temperatures met. The wings caught them unevenly, lifting one side, then the other. The aircraft rolled slightly, then stabilized. It was messy, ungraceful, but it worked. Altitude loss slowed further. The engines remained silent. But the sky itself had become an unwilling partner, offering just enough lift to delay the inevitable. Inside the cabin, people felt it before they understood it. The pressure against their bodies changed. The sensation of weightlessness eased. The constant downward pull softened, replaced by something steadier. Heads lifted, eyes opened wider. No one celebrated. No one smiled. Hope arrived quietly, careful not to draw attention to itself, afraid it might be chased away. The aircraft emerged from the cloud layer into broken light. Below, the ground was no longer invisible. Shapes appeared, first as shadows, then as definition. Fields, roads, water reflecting the sky. The realization moved through the cabin like a slow wave. They were close enough to see the world again. Close enough for distance to matter. The pilots adjusted their plan instantly. With limited control and no engines, options were narrow. There would be no second attempt. Whatever surface they chose would have to accept them the first time. Every calculation balanced distance, terrain, wind, and remaining altitude. The aircraft continued its fragile glide, bleeding height but refusing to surrender it all at once. Inside, fear transformed into something sharper. Survival was no longer abstract. It was specific. The ground was real now, and with it came the possibility of impact, of violence, of pain. But it also carried the possibility of standing, of breathing, of walking away. The impossible had not fully happened yet, but it was no longer a fantasy. The plane descended toward a patch of land that offered space, openness, and the faint promise of forgiveness. The wings held. The structure endured. Every second felt earned. Every meter of air felt precious. They had prepared for death earlier with calm hands and quiet hearts. Now, without anyone saying it aloud, they prepared for something far more dangerous. They prepared to live. The aircraft was no longer falling, but it was not flying either. It drifted forward like a wounded bird, carried only by momentum and a thin promise of air beneath its wings. Inside, the shaking had softened into a deep, uneasy vibration that felt permanent. People had stopped screaming. Some had stopped praying. Others held on to the strange calm that comes only after fear has exhausted itself. The crew moved through the cabin with steady focus, their faces marked by strain yet strengthened by purpose. Outside the windows, the endless sky slowly gave way to land, a vast stretch of uneven ground that no one had planned to see from this angle. The systems were barely alive. Power flickered in brief pulses, enough to keep a few instruments glowing, not enough to trust them. Every calculation now depended on instinct, experience, and a shared understanding that there would be no second attempt. The aircraft descended in long, shallow arcs, trading height for distance, every second stretching like a lifetime. Wind pressed against the fuselage, changing direction without warning, testing the fragile balance that kept disaster at bay. Still, the plane obeyed, responding just enough to remain controllable. Below, a wide-open valley appeared, rough but clear of buildings, crossed by thin roads and scattered trees. It was not an airport. It was not even safe. But it was land, and land meant a chance. The crew adjusted what little they could, aligning the aircraft with the longest possible stretch, choosing survival over perfection. Inside the cabin, passengers braced themselves as instructed earlier, their bodies tense, their minds quiet in a way that felt unreal. The descent steepened. Air rushed louder around the wings. The ground rose faster now, details sharpening with terrifying clarity. Grass, dirt, and stone filled the windows. The aircraft's frame groaned as if protesting the strain. Yet it held together, refusing to surrender. In those final moments, time fractured. Thoughts became flashes. Faces of loved ones. Regrets left unresolved. Gratitude for chances already lived. Then the impact came. The first contact was brutal. A violent scrape that tore through the underside of the aircraft. The second was worse. A bone-shaking udar that forced the wings to flex beyond their limits. One broke away, spinning into the dirt in a cloud of debris. The cabin lurched sideways, throwing everything loose against the restraints. Sound-overwhelmed thought. Metal screamed. Earth tore past at impossible speed. Yet the fuselage stayed intact, skidding across the ground, slowing inch by inch, refusing to break apart. When the aircraft finally stopped, silence followed with shocking suddenness.